Hey guys, and welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. Bit of a change of scenery here. I've just moved house and my new set isn't quite ready for you. So we're in my office now, and we're going to be taking a look at the brand new Dell XPS 13. You might not be able to tell from the outside, but this version of the XPS 13 is actually upgraded compared to the model that launched towards the end of last year. Only in one single way though, and that's the move to new Intel 8th generation Kaby Lake R processors. Even though this is just a simple CPU swap, it's a pretty big upgrade for the XPS 13, considering the performance difference between the dual-core Kaby Lake processors used previously and these new quad-core parts we're seeing now. Some testing I did for TechSpot a few months ago showed performance gains near 50%, but of course we'll explore that more later in the video. To start with, I wanted to discuss the design of the XPS 13, which has changed very little in the nearly 3 years since the first Broadwell model launched. We have seen some minor additions over time, like the inclusion of a fingerprint sensor for Windows Hello and a USB-C port, but the basic design with its ultra slim bezels has remained pretty much the same. I have seen some reviews floating around that suggest the design of the XPS 13 is a bit stale and needs to be updated to remain relevant up against other modern ultra portables. While I do agree the design is a bit stale, I actually don't think it needs to be updated. When the XPS 13 first launched in early 2015, the design was quite far ahead of its competitors, delivering a massive display in a smaller than normal chassis. A couple of years later, and the XPS 13 design isn't the standout it once was, thanks to other OEMs, lifting their game, but it's still pretty good and holds its own against the competition. In fact, we're still not at the point where all other laptops are maximizing the screen real estate and minimizing bezels, though, we are, I guess, slowly getting there. If you haven't seen an XPS 13 before, the build uses aluminium on the lid and underside, plus soft touch carbon fiber around the keyboard and trackpad. The two-tone design looks fantastic, and it feels great to hold when shut thanks to the matte metal finish. The keyboard palm rest does accumulate fingerprints rather easily, though it feels great when typing. Dell isn't super concerned with making the slimmest or lightest laptop, which is why the XPS 13 sits up to 15mm thick and 1.3 kilograms for the touchscreen model. This is a good choice anyway, as it allows them to cram in a large 60 watt-hour battery and keep the overall footprint small. The XPS 13 is still one of the smallest 13-inch notebooks you can buy. The slim bezel experience with the XPS 13, it's still great, though you will have to put up with the less than ideal webcam placement. You'll also have to choose between the 1080p non-touch and QHD plus touchscreen display options, which are the same as earlier models. The high resolution display comes with a battery life hit, though obviously it's a fair bit sharper. And the keyboard and trackpad remain unchanged, both of which offer a decent experience. Some of the modifier keys are a little smaller than other keyboards, though this doesn't hurt usability too much, and the feel to each key is fairly average these days for a laptop. The trackpad is excellent though, and you won't have any problems using it. Guess what? The I/O, it's also unchanged in a surprise to no one. 2 USB 3.0 ports on either side, Thunderbolt 3 port with just 2 PCIe lanes, and a 3.5mm headphone jack and an SD card slot. Unfortunately, the XPS 13 still charges using a proprietary connector rather than USB-C. I'd rather see an additional USB-C port added to the device for charging, which could double as handy connectivity when not being used for charging. Now, my review unit came with a 13.3-inch 1080p IPS LCD, which is the base option available. I prefer this over the QHD Plus model, even though the higher res model comes with a touchscreen, mostly because 1080p is perfectly fine for a 13.3-inch display, and you can eke out extra battery life at a lower resolution. Brightness from this display is excellent, exceeding 450 nits at peak when viewing an all-white screen. Viewing angles are also very good, and the use of a matte finish rather than gloss helps to reduce reflections and improve visibility. However, while the display does look pretty good from a casual standpoint, it's not the best for creative professionals that demand color accuracy. The XPS 13 implements dynamic contrast, which adjusts brightness and other parameters on the fly in an attempt to improve the experience. As far as I can tell, it's impossible to disable this setting, and that leads to poor color performance. As a result, the XPS 13's display is poor from a color calibration standpoint. The display is tinted blue with an average temperature around 7100K, and grayscale performance is weak, but it gets worse when looking at saturation and color checker results, which push past a Delta E average of 8.0. This is very inaccurate and unsuitable for those who want to create images or other things accurately. With that said, it is hard to accurately measure the performance of a display that dynamically adjusts, as the composition of an image can affect how each individual color is displayed. For my test, I measured steady state color performance with solid colors, though in practice performance could be better or it could be worse. Who really knows with dynamic contrast? Let's move on to talk about the big change in the Dell XPS 13, the upgrade from 7th gen to 8th gen U series processors from Intel. Unlike previous generations, which only brought minor improvements over their predecessors, Intel's 8th gen parts managed to go from 2 cores and 4 threads to 4 cores and 8 threads in the same 15-watt TDP and with relatively similar power consumption. Intel has even managed to increase peak clock speeds with 8th gen parts. Looking at the Core i7-8550U compared to the Core i7-7500U, single and dual core turbo speeds jump to 4.0 GHz from 3.5 GHz, while the 8550U can hit 3.7 GHz on all 4 cores. However, base clocks do drop from 2.7 to 1.8 GHz, and during sustained workloads on all cores, you'll see lower clock speeds on 8th gen. Starting with a look at shorter workloads, which are what most people do on an ultra portable, the Core i7-8550U in my Dell XPS 13 review unit stacks up well. In some cases, like the XL Monte Carlo workload, the 8th gen Kaby Lake R part is twice as fast as the last gen Kaby Lake CPUs. At other times, like in MATLAB, gains are a more modest 30%, though that's still pretty impressive. And you can also see strong improvements in PCMark, which feature a collection of short and longer workloads. However, there are some interesting things to note here. The Dell XPS 13 does not always reach the same levels of performance as the Inspiron 13 7000 2-in-1, another long product name, but I did look at that laptop a couple of months ago, and the XPS 13 falls up to 23% behind in some cases like WinRAR. This appears to be due to a combination of less time at maximum boost clocks and around 15% less memory bandwidth, and some of these benchmarks are fairly memory heavy. The good news is that the XPS 13 compensates for this through excellent sustained performance in 3D rendering workloads like Cinebench and video rendering like X264 encoding. The XPS 13 was as much as 17% faster than the Inspiron 13 7000, which uses the exact same CPU. The i7-8550U also holds a commanding lead against the last gen 7500U. In Cinebench multi-threaded, it's 82% faster, while you also get single-threaded gains of 16% thanks to those higher clock speeds. The Kaby Lake R CPU is also capable of rendering X264 video around 62% faster, which is an enormous gain in a mobile form factor. Graphics performance has also improved, though it's not by nearly as much as CPU performance. In the heaviest graphics workloads, Kaby Lake R sees gains in the 5 to 10% range, though in more CPU demanding games or less intensive titles, the CPU performance does improve things a bit more than that. For storage, the XPS 13 uses a Samsung PM961 SSD, at least in my review unit, with the 256 gig drive. This is a fairly common drive for high-end ultra portables like this, so its performance isn't surprising. Excellent sequential reads and writes that exceed 1 gigabyte per second, with very solid random performance as well. It's not going to blow you away considering its popularity amongst the ultra portables, but it is very fast for everyday usage. It's also worth mentioning battery life, because this is one of the outstanding aspects of the XPS 13. That 60 watt-hour cell manages to last an incredibly long time for an ultra portable, topping the charts in most situations, so you definitely won't be disappointed with the battery life, especially considering you get that extra boost to performance thanks to the 8th gen parts. So the refreshed XPS 13 won't blow you away with new features or a revamped design, but it does improve in one critical area, and that's the performance. The inclusion of new 8th gen Intel Kaby Lake R processors does see an enormous gain on its predecessors, producing performance up to twice as fast as an equivalent 7th gen CPU. And it gets better if you're jumping from, say, an original Broadwell XPS 13 with performance more than 2.4 times greater at times. Pricing for the XPS 13 remains the same as last year, though at the moment only some XPS 13 models come with the 8th gen CPUs. If you're after the base $800 model or the $1,000 model, you'll be looking at 7th gen parts, so I'd avoid those for now. The variant I review costs $1,149, which is okay for a Core i7, 8GB of RAM and a 256GB SSD, but it's not the cheapest out there, and Aussies can expect to pay around $1,800 for this model when it becomes available. Though right now you can grab a Core i5 equivalent for $1,600, which is a pretty reasonable price. Considering the design still holds up well and the XPS 13 is one of the most portable 13-inch devices on the market, I'd still recommend it for those wanting a pure laptop. If you want a 360-degree hinge or other fancy features though, the familiar design of the XPS 13 won't be for you, but that's the beauty of having so many great choices on the market these days. Anyway, that's it for this review of the new Dell XPS 13. There's links in the description below if you're interested in checking out the current prices of this laptop through Amazon, and I'll be back very soon to finally take a look at those Ryzen mobile APUs that many of you guys have been asking about. AMD has finally hooked me up there, so check back soon on the channel for that. Until then, I'll catch you next time.